Thank you for joining XROM, which is India's first AR/VR focus podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Avil, and today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Scott O'Brien, who's the founder, CEO of Humense, which is a volumetric startup. So obviously we're going to be talking about volumetric capture, what it is, why is it so important, and the future of it. So Scott, welcome to the show, and why don't we start with a little introduction, a background, who you are, what got you interested in volumetric capture?
Well, not to give you the full life story, but at age about 3, I had this toy, and it was called a Viewmaster. And there's many of us who are around the 40 to 50 years old had this as a toy when we were younger, and these photos appeared on a circle, and click, click, click. We had this heads-up display that took us to different places. And, my great-grandparents founded Yellow Pages in Australia.
Wow.
and Pink Pages and White Pages. Unfortunately, my grandfather sort of disconnected from the business, and I grew up in poverty in a sense. But that toy was enough to sort of fire the imagination, together with watching Disney cartoons and other sort of shows that would, at least afford your mind's eye this transportation to other places, despite where you are physically. I got to play professional sport, and that really fired up my imagination. And naively, I thought, watching The Matrix in around the year 2000, I was on a couch in Norway, and I thought, why can't we watch sport and do e-commerce in this cyber construct that they're talking about in The Matrix? And I just kept having conversations and giving slivers of ideas away, and prepared to look silly. Then, in 2006, I saw a wine company called Wolf Blaus in Australia, who sponsors the Ashes cricket back in the day. And my idea was commercialized by these people I was sharing this idea with. And it was a campaign called Chant for Your Army. You could choose Australia or England. And they converted your voice to text, and you could take a seat in the virtual stadium, bring your mates in, win a ticket to the game, and so on. And I thought, hang on here, it's my idea. I should get more and more into this. And then I took some stepping stones. So it wasn't a direct line, from the Viewmaster, from watching The Matrix to whatever. It wasn't a direct line. There were stepping stones. In 2007, I organised a parade. I sold a parade for about 2 million Australian dollars. That was signing up the Prime Minister, it was signing up David Beckham, it was signing up Jerry Seinfeld. And then the next stepping stone important was I built the second largest internet retail event in the world, and it happened in Sydney in 2009. And in that year, one of the anchor sponsors out of the 6 anchor sponsors was IBM, a little company you might have heard of. And they were saying it can't just be picture price in e-commerce. And I was saying, I don't know this. I watched a movie, and that's what I was saying. And then one of my amateur sports buddies taps me on the shoulder and says, Scott, I'm lecturing in this thing in industrial design, and I'm getting my students to do augmented reality. Now, this was mid-2009. And he said, I know you've been in business and sponsorships and so on. Can you tell me what I should do with this? And I looked at it, and within 10 seconds, I quit my job, and I decided to write a business plan. And then 3 months into the plan, my co-founder at the time says to me, well, I'm industrial designer and everything. Well, actually, I could design a pair of glasses instead of us using the laptop or the phone. And I looked at him and said, why didn't you tell me that when we started? So I rewrote the business plan. 6 months later, I got a tap on the shoulder from a friend overseas. It was a project to help win the hosting rights for a very large sports event by making holographic players perform in stadiums around the world while physically they played in one stadium. We had 6 weeks to build not just the first optical see-through glasses, so like the glasses you're wearing, but with electronic componentry to the side. Now, a lot of people say, like HoloLens or like Magic Leap. More like a pair of glasses that Nreal have made, more like that form factor and performance. Back in 2010, in 6 weeks. and with a pretty minimal budget. When we got our near $1 million land in the account to build this in 42 days, we, myself and my co-founder, we jumped on a plane that took us to 12 cities in 9 nights around the world. So we did Los Angeles out, a couple of hours out of Los Angeles, back in Seattle for a few nights, Detroit, Chicago, New York, London, Paris, Paris, Hong Kong, back to Sydney. And we came back to a team. We were a 3-person startup, and we came back to a team of 55. Half the people we'd never met before in our lives, never mind face to face, to an office we'd never stepped in before. So we were lucky to have a company secretary that was just incredible, who helped manage things on ground while we were doing this race around the world building these glasses. But not only did we build the glasses, back then we had the excitement of hiring someone to help us apply Unity game engine to AR glasses for the first time. And we also had to build the Hollywood level creative that you would see in these glasses. So you would have this sort of world's first AR holographic ceremony, as well as these glasses then helping you look at the sport and have the more or less layman's terms, as we know, holographic information following the players, and commentators, as they do on TV, they draw on the field and they should have been here, should have been there, this is where they came from, there's the gaps, and so on. So we had to build that sort of tool also within that 42 days. And thankfully for us, it was a bold project, super audacious, but thankfully for us, we did successfully deliver. And once you've had that experience, how can you ever walk away from that industry? And so hence I've been with it for the last 11 years.
It's such an awesome story. I've got like something, maybe, it should be converted. I should be buying this right and making a movie out of it, or web series, because it's a story in there of an entrepreneur, somebody who started as a professional, somebody who was vested in sports, going through that journey with that dream in your bag. From, you said, the three-year-old, that's when you that's the time when you experienced the VMaster. That's what he said. Yeah. So holding that dream and then making that dream a reality. I mean, so awesome. I mean, the things that you have done, I mean, I can just break up each of those different things that you've done, right from the 2007 parade, which you sold for $202 million, to the second largest retail event, to building an AR glasses back in 2010, to creating the world's first holographic players. How cool is that? Talk to us about the journey. I mean, and talk to us about Humense. And what's been the challenges and what's been the delight of living your dream and turning your dream into a reality?
I've really learned that if you play the long game and not get so reactive to things, then you can stick it out through any assertions of it's too early or it's too late or what have you. So actually, I should give credit to a practice called Vipassana. For my resilience levels, in coming into AR VR before it was an industry, really, before it was an ecosystem. Today, people ask, when's AR VR going to go mainstream? Well, there's arguments that it already is, of course, because 500 million people a day are pointing their own phone at their faces, which is then puppeteering whatever other action, on the basis of identity, vanity, and ego, in a sense. And as you can see from the backdrop behind me, Humense is about what can AR and VR tools do with looking outwards to the world. So my first AR VR company was called Explore Engage, and more or less that was the name. It was describing what we do. We used our phone, or we used our new AR VR tools to explore and engage with the world. And we did it at a time where click farming was rife, where a lot of fraud was happening, that moved from, the like farming, but then made its way 2013 to 2016 through a lot of the falsified video counts and so on. So here we were feeling that AR VR is probably one of the most suitable mediums for human interactions, learning, and knowledge transfer, and entertainment in a spatial sense, as we're spatial beings. Yet we were up against, people in agency world saying, oh, it's about reach. It's about how many likes you've got, or it's about how many video views. Well, as people are waking up to now, actually it's more about the authentic connections that we have with each other and with the brand. And if the brand was a person, who would be its friend? And so, it's a bit of a celebration now that we're playing in a world that's more honouring of genuine human capabilities and connection. It was just a thrill to be part of laying down the first bricks, and a salute out there to my fellow colleagues in AR VR world who are introducing applications that are dropping people's jaws. Even today, they've never seen some AR VR interaction. So there's still many people out there for us to reach. But I think it's great to be part of this ecosystem. Yeah, so it's been really interesting, to watch the AR VR industry evolve in these chapters. People talk about timing, and there's a movie called Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. That 2010 project, that was a bit of a sliding door moment, because we were just one short step away from a group buying 40,000 headsets to entertain everybody in a stadium. That's from Cover Time magazine, that potential. And if that happened in 2010, it could have really bent time. And it's been wonderful to see the AR VR industry in India increase since around 2017, 2018. So and great that with your resource there as well to help celebrate all the success.
Right. So there's some exciting things happening globally when it comes to AR, VR, MR. You mentioned about the event when for the sports, you were almost about to deploy 40,000 VR headset. And if that could have happened in 2010, I think the world would have looked completely different. Maybe we to 11 years from now, to 2021, maybe it could have been mass adoption, so this technology is so awesome. We're still scratching the surface with it, because there's some of the top companies, like Facebook, Microsoft, Magic Leap, and so on, and so many others. And besides the biggies, there are these startups, I think, who are innovating in ways which are unimaginable here. In India, you mentioned, things are accelerating when it comes to the AR VR ecosystem. I got into AR VR back in 2015. At that point of time, there was just close to somewhere around 6 or 7 startups when it came to AR VR. Currently, we have 2,000 plus, and somebody says that it could be close to 2,500. Now, once these startups are linked with all the stakeholders, as in the investment community, the government support, the marketing ecosystem, it will accelerate and give us benefits and values individually as well as enterprises. So I'm really excited for where this is going. We are on the cusp of breaking out from a 2D medium of flat interfaces into the 3D world. So here, even AR, VR, MR is not completely adopted. It's still maybe a couple of years to go for it to be something that will compel us to wear a device like this the entire day. Now we are at AR, VR is still ahead. You've got into volumetric capture, right? So that, and you are, I think, one of those companies in the world who's actually, linked it to businesses and created value from long time back. start explaining what is volumetric video for my audience who don't know about it. And besides the sports, what are the industries where you see that there's going to be tremendous use cases for this?
First of all, though, I'd like to say, like the glasses you're wearing now, I joke with people wherever I go around the world that these glasses, you will be furious with them in a few years' time, because they only give you one app, and that is to see better. In a few years' time, you'll demand glasses that have like 1,000 apps on your face, whereas we're taking the line from Steve Jobs with 1,000 songs in your pocket when he was first selling iPods to the world. So 1,000 apps on your face. What does that world look like? You know, it's one thing to have the hardware, but what is the content? Volumetric video. It's almost as simple as the name implies. It's video with volume. So right now, you and I are communicating on flat video. And so I like to sometimes describe volumetric video as video you can sort of walk in and around, above, and enjoy a subject matter from whatever angle or scale that you prefer. And so how do we do it? It's good to explain volumetric video from inputs and outputs. So the input is sometimes from just one camera or a combination of sensors from one unit in the modern phones. Zoom, there we go, takes out back there. But you know, most commonly volumetric video has been assembled from multi-view camera positions. So then through pattern recognition, computer vision, and then machine learning, we're able to reconstruct objects in 3 dimensions. And with that, sometimes, you know, if you had a camera looking at my arm, under the arm there would be occlusions. And so, you know, as you get more clever, you build in machine learning to fill in the holes and so on. So volumetric video, a little bit like Princess Leia in the 1977 Star Wars, is not perfect. There's a bit of glitch, there's, you know, but with that, years later, there's nostalgia. And in fact, sort of like TikTok and other applications that cut us out, like on these Zoom videos, people think, oh, it's okay, it doesn't need to be perfect. As long as, you know, we've got that human representation there. And lo and behold, Star Wars then went on to present their holograms in around 2000, 2003 in this perfect HD way. And then they started to find that audiences didn't so much like that. So they went back to the nostalgic glitch. But that said, now volumetric video can be filmed, you know, with 4K, 8K, and even just a month ago we were testing with 12K cameras. So the more pixels we can get on a, you know, subject, you know, the greater output we can have in volumetric video. But that said, in 4G and even 5G, we are going to need to compress this volumetric video, because it's a lot more challenging to send a volumetric video across the airwaves than a flat video. What does this mean? Well, at first, the consideration for what does this mean comes from the movie industry, entertainment industry generally, and that includes sports as well. So with TV coverage of sports and/or a movie, it's the director deciding which angles and so on. Of course, the beautiful thing with AR VR is we're now putting that director responsibility and possibility into the hands of whoever owns one of these, and that's really exciting. Volumetric video, as I'm describing it now, is about cameras outside looking in, you know, on a centralized object. But potentially also volumetric video could be inside looking out. So, you know, imagine your car's driving around in India and just constantly mapping the world in a 3D reconstruction on the fly. So, you know, it's outside in and inside out, potentially volumetric video.
Said something extremely profound. I think, you know, when people talk about the glasses, nobody says it the way you said it. You know, you said that the only app that we have for a glass is a side. You know, you can only see better. But eventually, once we have a head wearable device, which could be head wearable computer, which will, a phone and a computer will converge into one single wearable device. You'll have thousands of apps. That itself is so profound. If people understand that and keep it with them, they'll know the future that's coming is going to be, it'll be of plentiful. The things that you could do.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the volumetric capture, obviously, you mentioned that, there is various ways to go about it. There's various companies who are looking at it in different ways of capturing voxels. Now, there are companies such as Intel, which had the biggest volumetric studio, but they had to shut down. Then there are other startups, smaller startups, who are innovating and cutting down the cameras, and there are people who are now innovating with possibly just one cameras or two cameras. What would be the difference of the output? First question. What would be the road to democratization of this technology? Because unless and until this technology doesn't go on to the masses, it does not get democratized. And talk to me about the inside looking outward. How do we get that?
Because obviously, if we can film volumetric video just from your smartphone and make guesses, what does that person look like from behind, even though we don't have that data, what's a good enough delivery? And, of course, for singers and dancers, it's more important what you look like all around, and maybe in some sports as well. But in business presentation, we don't need to see what someone looks like from behind necessarily, right? So there are different use cases that will have different demands, and that will determine, the different take-up. And look, I think also from the way that AR has indeed crossed the chasm already for the consumer with Snap and Insta filters and so on, 99% of the 500 million people plus per day and getting towards 1 billion don't even know the words augmented reality or virtual reality. They don't need to either.
Exactly.
So this is fine. Okay, most of my time has been, and since February 2010 was the first time I filmed volumetric video. And that was with 8 DSLR cameras, outside looking in on one person. And of course, now we can do multiple people. We can do one camera. We can do all this sort of slicing and dicing variations. But it does excite me. It's a slight different pipeline for, let's say, the Google car driving around. So instead of creating a bubble, as it does, like a 360 spherical bubble, with a combination of LiDAR potentially, or not even needing LiDAR anymore, we could have depth calculations frame by frame by frame by frame as the car goes down the street. So I spoke earlier about occlusions. So if you've got the cameras outside looking in, of course, how does it get under your arm? And sometimes between the legs it can't see because it's occluded from that angle. And so some things you have to sort of fill holes. So similarly with the cameras inside looking out, if there's a tree there, it's not going to see behind the tree. But what about 5 seconds before it drove down? We did see behind the tree then. So there are ways where we can fill a space and film it volumetrically by time traveling from 2 seconds ago and 5 seconds ago looking back and 2 seconds before looking this way and so on. And we can fill the world with the data. And if we do have a blind spot, well, you could argue that how important is that blind spot anyway if, we didn't see the data from all these different angles. So for the self-driving car people out there, I think this is an incredible business model to attach with the function of transport to have our terrestrial 3D world map, because no doubt satellites, and especially low orbital satellites, are going to do a great job for the macro view, top down, but terrestrial 3D scanning is a super exciting opportunity as well, which can, obviously I feel be utilised for chambers of commerce, through to emergency planning, everything in between.
I think the world is eventually going to move on to self-driving vehicles, and they need 3D maps. And there is a correlation over here, because with volumetric capture, what's the correlation you see with the metaverse? And talk to us a little bit more about the use cases which is going to open up once this gets more widespread.
You brought up the word that's perhaps one of the most shiny words in the last month or two, metaverse. To me, when considering the metaverse and where we are now and where that idea is, I look at the metaverse in two different ways. One is I look at it in a way to describe the metaverse is like describing consciousness. I think that's how profound it is and how intangible it is. And the next question from that is, will we ever get there? And I think we will get there as quickly and effectively as we get to dissect fully and describe fully consciousness. So I think in a way it's a word that's a riddle in a sense. Does consciousness exist? Of course. Does the metaverse exist? Well, perhaps already, of course. And so on one hand, I look at, Elon Musk talking about simulation theory. And if we look at Planck's distance, the smallest identifiable or tangible distance, and if we look at the world as, potentially full of pixels, like in Planck's distance, pixels, then there are some interesting relationships between all the pixels. And could this be some sort of simulation? And then, taking a step back to where we are today, from the manufacturer's point of view, they're selling us mobile phones, which often, we are using for augmented reality. In fact, pre-mobile phones, we had the normal telephone, and that was our first major augmented reality because the person wasn't there. Their voice was augmented through this device. So audio augmented reality, of course, that is super widespread. So it could be argued augmented reality has been with us for decades. And if you're talking about human-centered design, you're talking about the modalities that we sense the world with. And of course, our eyes are pretty important, but they're not the only thing. And so when we've got a so-called VR headset on our face, we're getting the vision. Yeah, we'll get good audio, hopefully, as well. But touch and is still predominantly in the real world. Taste is still in the real world. And so Aristotle got us to focus on 5 main senses. So, yeah, okay, fair enough. The so-called VR headset's taking care of 2 of those. There's another 3 that's not. And then there's 30-plus submodalities, which in modern life we've often marginalised. But I really believe through the submodalities and through the other 3 main senses that still most of our human experience is in the real world, and these so-called VR headsets, well, they're actually augmenting our human experience. So in one sense, I look at the world through simulation theory and appreciate, actually, yeah, well, that is a potential VR explanation of the world. But then I look at the human-centered design discipline and those frameworks and see, actually, well, everything could be augmented reality and everything could be virtual reality at the same time. So it's a philosophical, simultaneous, dual competing logic.
So since we've touched that subject, and you also mentioned that in the beginning of the conversation that you've been really inspired by the movie Matrix, and so was I. When I saw the movie Matrix, it left me with more questions. And from 2015, when I actually got vested in virtual reality, Let me just go a little bit back. As in, I don't have any education background whatsoever. So my background is music. I've played for a rock band for 15 years, and I've toured all over, played music, composed for a couple of Bollywood feature films, and that's been my learning background. So creativity is what so my education is nil. But
music is math.
Yeah, yeah. So from 2015, when I discovered virtual reality, I started self educating myself through internet, through various books and stuff like that. I touched upon the subject quantum physics, and then my world changed. And then you mentioned something about the Planck distance, and you mentioned about the simulation, you mentioned about the consciousness, and all of these, it gets extremely hazy and complicated for a lay person. But I guess anybody who wants to understand life in its most basic form needs to understand that everything is made out of atoms, and the atoms, when they kind of clunk up, they become animate and inanimate objects. And there has been a experiment done in 1930s with before Niels Bohr, and before that also, which posits that through the double slit experiment, that the thing that we are made of does not exist. It comes into existence only by a human observer. So these things are, and now then we have these people such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom, talking about the possibility of us being in a simulated world. And I guess there's Donald Hoffman and Joshua Bach. They explain it very eloquently about us being in a simulated world. For me, maybe I'm digressing and saying a couple of things, but I guess for me, virtual reality is nothing but emulating the physical reality. And you rightfully pointed out, we've got maybe 2 or 3 of them. We've got the visual, we've got the sound pretty much right. With the haptics, we're just trying to emulate it. Eventually, I think maybe in the near future, we'll be able to simulate all of our 5 senses, and maybe all of those 30 modalities which you talk about. I don't know whether we could, but I think that we could get over there. Talk a little bit more about this, the simulation world. Does the world need to know about it, or the world is always going to say that it's a woo-woo subject, let's stay away from it?
So one of the lines from Morpheus to Neo in the Matrix is that everything is an electronic signal in your brain. And so it's that signal, those synaptic connections as a result, that's communicating to us this symbol and that symbol, or this space and that space, have a certain meaning. Many lifetimes required to understand the full extent of how everything is relating. But in the simple aspect of understanding all of this, if anyone wants to sort of start a venture in understanding it, there's a lovely little doco on YouTube called What is Reality, which posits several different theories. And something that started me on this trail as well, and it's more from the consciousness side and the meaning of life side, is another documentary called I Am. And so, I've taken the view that in this world, no one's totally wrong, no one's totally right, and that there are different views, and there can be simultaneous dual competing logic in things. And for the layman to fully appreciate AR, VR, I think they can't necessarily say, I understand everything and I stop here, I'm not taking in anything new. That would be a wasted life to stop learning, I think. And I think whilst it's good to understand the philosophical backgrounds and the technical backgrounds, you don't necessarily need to. But if you're open and curious, you will not only be a good creator with AR, VR tools, but you'll also be a good consumer with AR, VR tools.
Let's jump back into the volumetric capture. You mentioned sports. Now, both India and Australia, I think, are really bonkers when it comes to about cricket. and at least here in India, cricket is a religion. What is the opportunity that you see? Have you been engaging with businesses over here? And could you also talk about some of your recent works that you've done, which you're really excited about?
Yeah, well, I am excited to and honoured to have my first investor from the state of Kerala, who's also a resident in Australia. And for that reason, I was back and forward India, and particularly 2017, 2018, and, covering Bangalore, Kochi, Goa, Mumbai, and so on. And I think that cricket is a beautiful game of physics, and I really enjoyed that aspect of cricket. I grew up with it. I was obsessed with cricket as a kid, and it was such an important fabric of Australian summers, which are great times to relish. I still think there's a lot more innovation left to go in cricket, and I think that by leveraging people's smartphones as they are, but also to imagine what is that future with glasses. And so I think, with cricket, it's a great basis, so I think there's this beautiful bridge between Australia and India with that, and that can be a symbol through to other business. So in that way, sport serves a beautiful adjacency to many other use cases. As a person that appreciates and has friends that were producers on a movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity, from India, and then also having deeply appreciated Vipassana, and also as I've been fortunate, my first investors from Kerala originally. I think there's this great bridge between Australia and India, and cricket is a great symbol of that bridge. And and I think between our countries, we're inventive. I mean, I love Jugaad innovation. And in Australia and New Zealand, we talk about number 8 wire and gaffer tape. So on these lean budgets, what can we do? And I think this is a beautiful design constraint, because I think thinking of designing anything, you should consider the bottom billion healthy, wealthy people, and for that, what are the leanest resources? And then if you're designing around that, then this is something that can help what is soon going to be 8 billion people on the planet. That population clock is ticking.
Exactly. Any advice to entrepreneurs or enthusiasts who want to get into volumetric video or AR, VR? What would you tell them, and where to start?
There's a fair bit of reading material out there. And my company, Humense, feel free to reach out to us, and we offer internships. And so I think, one of the fastest way to learn is to get your hands dirty. And it might be that you're a student, or if you're not a student, after hours, you might want to take on a little internship, which can help both parties. It can help the newcomer learn about the industry or new tools that go in the technology stack. And then, from there, you'll sort of understand where you are in the world, because I think there's a wide open possibility for volumetric video. There's sort of so many disciplines required in it, from psychology through to technology. And in a way, I look at all of this AR, VR business as a three-circle overlap between technology, psychology, and magic.
Scott, thank you for being part of the show and talking to us. It was a really insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. I mean, my last question is, think about it like a thought experiment of sorts. Picture yourself sitting in 2031. What is the world going to look like in 10 years? How is AR, VR, MR, volumetric video, artificial intelligence converging going to transform our lives?
I think it's going to have big impact by then on infrastructure investment decisions, which then affect, everybody. So I think by then it will be well and truly realised that a holographic telepresence is as important as road, rail and airports. And with that, I think, we will have at least half the population wearing 1,000 apps on their face. And with that, there will be better access to telehealth, so to speak, education, our entertainment will be completely transformed. I think more people will feel more empowered, whereas at the moment, of course, with protests around the world and with the lockdowns we're experiencing right now, it's sort of like the analogy, and especially coming from an Australian, perhaps appropriate, it feels like you're a surfer and you're getting pulled into this wave, as a surfer does when they're about to get up on the board and ride that wave. So the torment and torture that is going on around the world in many respects right now, it just feels like this is a signal that some big shift is on the way. And the shift from 2D mediums to these 3D AR, VR worlds and micro experiences, I feel it's going to be more transformative than the printing press, than from print to TV, more transformative by double-digit multiples. Yeah, I think the world is a better place because of the introduction and the proliferation of these technologies.
Lovely. What a note to end on. I think, the world is going to be a different place. I look forward to what the world is going to look like, and I hope that we play a role in creating that world. And you mentioned that there is some sort of a change, a big shift which seems to be happening, and COVID seems to be that accelerator of everything that's digital. And I personally am excited about the delivery of education and healthcare. That I think which is a problem here in India. We are a big country, and it's the only the urban dwellers have the privilege of a quality education and healthcare. There's a lot of people who are deprived of good quality, and I think AR VR could be that tool which could democratize healthcare and education. And yeah, so I hope all of those words that you said becomes true in this 10 years, and I hope that the world becomes better. So in that note, thank you, Scott, for being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, please press subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate this.
Thank you, Eddie. An absolute pleasure.